that we managed to learn along the way. To the bone. Sometimes confusing to us Americans, to the bank. Bem-vindo. Now here's one that is kind of out of the normal Portuguese sort of phrase book that you might see. Ebola. But finally, obrigado. Thank you for having us here today. We're very delighted to be here with you. Just to give you a brief history about us and our involvement at Blue Sky Studios. I've been at Blue Sky Studios since 1998, and I've worked with Carlos Saldanha, the director of Rio, on many, many projects going back about 12 or 13 years now. So it was a great joy for me to be able to join the Rio team and help make this movie, which was clearly a passion project for Carlos and a love letter to the city of Rio. And since that time, and my involvement, having now visited Rio, I can add my name to the bottom of the love letter because I really love it here.
We want to stay here.
So it's great to be back. We were here for the world premiere last March, which was my first introduction to the city, and we saw many of the sites which are featured in the film. And for us, we had already made the movie before we actually came to the city, so we were like, wait, those are the sidewalks that are in our movie. You know, they copied our movie and they put them right in the city.
There were a lot of moments like that. Carlos was right. Carlos was right.
You know, all the details, even down to like the coconut trucks and the way the coconuts are opened by the street vendors and all that. It was really fantastic to experience that. And we finally understood Carlos's attention to detail and why those things were so important. And I think the audiences in Brazil have also identified with that attention to detail, and that's why they've embraced the movie so well. So our talk is going to be a little bit different than the ones that some of the other guys are doing here at the festival, because we're going to be looking at the movie kind of from a producer's point of view, which is a little different than, say, Tom Cardone's talk, which is going to be talking a lot about the art direction, and Carlos's, which is more about the creative and aesthetics part. We're going to be talking about that a little bit, but I also wanted to give you a sense of what goes into actually trying to build a movie of this scope and scale from nothing. And so a brief overview of what we're talking about. Here's some bullet points that we're going to hit, and Bruce jumped in for a moment.
But just to back up, this was my second film with Carlos. I worked with him on Ice Age 2, The Meltdown, and I've been at Blue Sky now for, this is my third film, and before that I was at Disney for a number of years with Disney Animation in Florida. So it was great to come into the CGI realm and get trained by great people like John. This is the first film that John and I got to produce on together, so we were excited about that. And we really fell in love with Rio. We loved working with Carlos, that's a given. But then to work with Carlos on his passion projects and fall in love with Rio, it was like an internet romance. We want to go there. We want to go there. When can we go there? So it was a lot of fun, and we're excited to talk about it. It is with a producer's bent. So anybody out there who's produced anything knows that it comes with its own unique set of challenges. And we get this question. We've gotten it throughout our careers. We'll continue to get it. If you have produced, then you know you'll get this question from immediate family. So what exactly do you do? What do you do? Like on the job, every day. What is it that you do? We talk a lot. We problem solve a lot. We plan a lot. We try to plan a lot. And then we deal with all the challenges that come up. So
yeah, and just a little bit more background about our roles and how they were a little bit different.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a lot of crossover with one another, and we work together as a team. But my responsibility on this movie was to be the creative producer. I happen to believe that every decision a producer makes is creative, but that's a separate conversation. But that meant that I was working with the writers, I was working with the cast, working with the executives at Fox, as was Bruce, and Carlos quite intimately to sort of shape the movie in a way that we were partners, where it was really Carlos's vision that drove the process forward, but it's any visionary must have a team of people to help him realize the vision. So it was our job oftentimes to figure out how to actually do the vision without spending all the money on the first scene in the movie, and remind ourselves that we had 90 minutes of film to make, and that we had to pace ourselves in such a way that we wouldn't be spending all of our time on things which we couldn't afford. We had to constantly be looking at the entire process. So that's kind of our job, and to make sure that from my perspective, that we're making the right choices, because directing a film is all about making choices and decisions as you go through, and that hopefully we're making the right choices so that the best things come up on the screen.
And some of the choices you make 2 years in advance. So we have to figure out which of those choices can we make 2 years before the movie's released, and which ones should we wait and wait and wait and wait on until we're almost out of time. In some cases we are out of time. So my primary job on the movies is to partner with the creative producer and the creative director and walk that fine line between art and commerce. So I'm in weekly meetings on schedules with managers, on schedules with executives, in finance meetings on the overall budget and the tracking of the personnel costs and every cost on the movie from week to week to week. And a lot of what's interesting, I find that interesting, which a lot of people find interesting, because how could you find that interesting? But I actually love charts and graphs. I love Excel. I love Microsoft Project. I don't mind. I'll own it. I'll own that. I love it. And it's a great partnership that we've had with Carlos to help him do that balancing act between, we want to see your vision all the way through. Couldn't be more supportive of your vision. You have to help us make choices along the way so that we can get the whole thing done on time. Because what doesn't change is the release date. Once that release date's announced, that's it. You know, we have to hit that. We've never missed it. I've never missed it on any project I've ever worked on, and I don't intend to, because I don't think I'd be standing here if I did.
So this is an image which is nearly final from the film. This is a completely computer graphics generated image. It's not a photo, but this represents, I think, kind of the scale and scope of what Carlos was looking for in making Film Rio, in that is very evocative of the city, the scope, and the grandeur that exists here. And so the question becomes, when you get that script, where do you start? You have a script, maybe it's a first draft, maybe it's a third draft. The script is never perfect. We don't start with a script and finish it from beginning to end. But how do you start the process? So where do you dig in? And so the first thing that we do is we break down the script. We take the written word and we break it down into a series of sequences. And those sequences are usually broken up by natural transition points within the film, which are often dictated by the location. This is probably similar to the way live action movies are broken down, in that you can't shoot a scene that takes place on top of Corcovado on the same day that you're going to be shooting on top of Sugarloaf. It just doesn't make any sense. So you would plan your shots to be on top of the Corcovado for one day, and then the next time you would be going over to Sugarloaf, and you do the same thing. So we do the same thing. We look at natural breaks in the script, places where the location changes, or maybe there's some big story transition. We also
our films do average between 35 and 40 sequences, in a movie. So that's one assumption that we make on every movie that we pre-plan, is that we're going to have anywhere from 35 to 40 sequences.
The other thing we do is we look for character groupings. And an animated film like this, as you guys know, there's a lot of time and effort that's spent in designing a character, designing how they look, how they move, what voices they have, and how much of the weight of the movie they're actually going to carry. So we look at character groupings, which help us determine what sequences to put into production first. It doesn't make sense, and really almost impossible, to put into production sequences which contain lots of characters as your first sequences in the movie, because it takes time to build and create these characters and get them ready for animation. So we look for sequences which have maybe a couple of characters, ideally one of the main characters, if you can, just to get the ball rolling and put some emphasis on designing some of the movie. So in this case, well, I'll get to that in a second. But
90% of the time, the first 3 to 5 sequences will just be with our principal characters. They're the ones that are early decisions in terms of what they're going to look like, who's going to play those roles, have you done production records for those roles, how many have you done so that you have it to a point where you could push some sequences into production. So the first handful are definitely smaller character count, for sure.
Right. And then we determine an approximate length for each of those sequences based on the amount of space it occupies within the script. It's a one-page. The rule of thumb on a Hollywood script is that it's generally 1 minute per page. So scripts are generally in the neighborhood of 90 to 100 pages. Sometimes in animation, they go a little bit faster because a lot of times there's a lot of action described. But it's about a minute per page of the script. So it's very easy to just say, okay, this sequence is 3 pages of script, so for now I'm going to say it's 3 minutes long. The other thing we look for is anything that's like out of the ordinary within the script, and Rio was full of those because there were sequences in the movie that were identified as being musically driven, which means that in order to animate to them, that means that the music needs to be created first, needs to be timed out, needs to be cut to music. So there were a couple sequences like that, and we'll get into a little bit more detail on some of those later. But that's different than a normal sequence, which would normally just have the characters speaking and sound effects and that kind of process. But we look for those things that are special, and then we may have to design a special pipeline just for those things.
And Carlos did not envision a standard Disney musical format or a musical format for the film. He just knew he wanted to bring music into that world and bring the viewers into experiencing the music of that world. So it took some time, not only in the script process, but as we were storyboarding, to figure out where are the good song moments in the film. So a lot of that's undetermined when we're starting the planning process.
And very early on, we didn't know who the musicians were going to be that were going to be joining the project. And then finally, we have to think about the process of actually selling the movie. And that is, so the marketing needs come into play. We have to plan for trailers, which are going to be out in advance of the movie by almost a year in some cases. Also, secondary partners. This movie, I think, had the largest international partnership arrangement of any movie that Fox has ever done. So there were something like 55.
We were close to 100 at the end of the day.
100 different licensing partners, all
Worldwide.
of which were just like, give me footage, or, give me character designs, give me something.
Yeah.
Way in advance. And their run times are way in advance as they're designing their campaigns and how they're going to actually incorporate our characters into their product. So
for instance, we work with Ferrero consistently, and they make the Kinder Eggs. And we've worked with them, I think, since Robots on every single film. And it's a slight irony there because we can't buy those products in the US, but they're huge worldwide. So we have to get them our character assets and our models and fine-tune what they need to do with their tiny little sculpts 18 months in advance of their product release. So their product release is usually before the actual movie's release. And when John's mentioning we have to sell the film, it's we're already, 20th Century Fox is invested in us helping them to release the film. We're selling it internally to other Fox divisions, consumer products, international marketing, domestic marketing, Fox Digital, mobile games, people that can then look for ways to, for lack of a better word, exploit the film's advertising benefits through those partnerships. A huge one for us was Angry Birds, which was an early want and an early get, and it was huge for us. That was a huge success, and that was a marketing tie-in. So it actually took me years. I tried to stay, what's the word? I thought I was being idealistic in terms of, well, I just want to help make films. I don't really care about marketing. You can't do one without the other anymore. So it's all part of the same. It's all part of the same business.
So what we have up here is one of the charts that Bruce was talking about. And this is a sequence breakdown. I think it's an early one because I'm seeing lots of sequences there that aren't in the movie anymore. But it's a first draft, perhaps of trying to break things down. This is a very simple one. Sometimes they get much more complicated as different departments start to look at it. How many effects are here? What kinds of special requirements will each one need? But we name them, we number them, and name them, and that's kind of a thing that we've been doing ever since we did the first Ice Age movie. And the reason is numbers work really well for like accounting purposes and sort of digital kind of stuff. But numbers are really hard to remember, but names are really good to remember. So we, for instance, a sequence that was very early released and was the basis of our first trailer, what is that?
005 capture.
Well, 005 capture, I was thinking of the...
240 hang gliding?
Yeah, 240 hang gliding.
See, it's funny. John says,
I can't remember them.
Numbers are really hard to remember.
As soon as you're done.
There's managers that I work with where all we remember is the number. And it's, that one shot you wanted, 307-100, yeah, what sequence was that in? It doesn't matter, it's in 307.
But that was sequence 240 hang gliding. Exactly. So it was a little descriptive, a little number.
And we didn't put this up here for anybody to read because obviously you can't because it's too small. But it's just the building blocks of getting organized. You have to plan. You have to write it down. And that's something that, in talking about doing this presentation, that we wanted to stress, no matter what the project is. We're fortunate enough to work on, big feature films. But no matter what the project is, if you're in school, just starting out, doing a student project, you really have to keep keeping yourself organized is key.
Right. And just a little tiny bit of blue sky history, like ancient blue sky history. Those of you who may remember the movie Bunny. In those days, we had sequences, and every shot had a name. So that was a little challenging after a while. What do I name this one? I don't know. And when you got a movie that has 1,600 shots in it, forget it.
Yeah.
Okay. So budget. That's another one that people ask us about. Oh, you guys are in charge of the money, right? You come up with the money. They hear producer and they think money. And really, no. What we do interact with the budget in that our main focus is trying to figure out the labor expenditure and the resources, which is the budget, essentially, because the major cost of making an animated feature film is the people. And so really what that is how many people and for how long. And so we spend a lot of time trying to figure that out, and sometimes we have to do that before we really know what the movie is. And then we have to adjust as we find out what the movie is, and we find out that we're woefully inadequately prepared. And we start to move things around and trade one department for another as the actuals start to come in. But the budget really is the labor. It's the biggest component. I mean, there are other components like cost of post-production, sound work, the cost of the actors, which is something which is kind of not within our necessarily control.
Right. And then our enemy is time, and the only way we're going to get it done on time is with the people. Our strength, and this is true at I think any major animation company, the strength is the crew, and it's how are you going to get them to produce the movie at that pace that you need and keep them invested all the way through. And when we talk about resources, when we talk about schedule, it all comes down to people have to create everything within every single frame. So that's an average of 150,000 plus frames, and every element of it needs to be handcrafted.
I want to throw in one little point here for the students among us, because I think one thing that is often overlooked in student projects is that at the beginning of the semester, they have grand ideas. They're going to make a 20-minute movie, and they're going to have 16 characters in them, and there's going to be, all the sound effects and music and all this great stuff. And then they sit down and they start to work one day, and they get halfway through the semester, and they go, "Oh my God, what have I created?" So I think it's
created the first 5 minutes.
Yeah, I've created the first 20 seconds, maybe.
Yeah.
So I think it really is beneficial for you artists, young artists out there who are interested in making a short film, to take a day, if that's all you can handle, and sit down and figure out how much time am I really going to be able to put into this in order to get to the end of the semester. And what do I want to get by the end of the semester, and start to think about, okay, I can work on this 12 hours a week. And you write down 12 hours a week, and I got 10 weeks to do it. So you write down, 100, whatever the math is. My brain is going. 120 hours. And figure out how much time are we going to be able to spend on animation? How much time am I going to be able to spend on editorial? How much time, and really kind of put a little budget together. And that will help you to see that it's impossible to do a 20-minute piece in a semester. And it's just good to kind of know. And also, that can be a gauge for you as you're working through your process and say, oh my gosh, I spent 80 hours on the animation alone, and I haven't even gotten to the lighting part yet, or the ink and paint, or whatever medium you're working in. And you can kind of then start to change how you're approaching the project. But it's, I think, a little bit of production management for even a student project, even if it's one person or 3 people, just sit down, figure out how much time you're really going to be able to put in. And that will save you those 4 a.m. nights where you're like trying to get the pose just right.
Yeah. I think just to weave into that 2 other suggestions, because I remember those days vaguely. And one thing, if you know that you don't have it within yourself to actually sit down for a day and balance a checkbook and look at what that would cost, one suggestion is to look what we do on every single movie, and anybody who runs a business does. You look at what you've done historically. So in the case of students, look at what other students have done historically, where did they fall into traps, and get their eyes on your plan because they've been through it. And also, if you have, create a partnership where, and this is, for me, a basic tenet of producing. I'm not very good at that. I will find somebody who will help me who is good at that. And that's what we do. I don't necessarily know how to do a lot of the things that are required to make an animated film, but I know who to go find and ask and make sure that they're giving me great information.
So this is a very rough pie chart of our crew. Just to give you a sense of this relative scale of the individual departments. And some of the departments have been munged together into one just for clarity. But this gives you a rough idea of the distribution. And you can see there's a fairly large chunk there that's marked as animators. And that's because that is, the moment in the film where the acting comes through. And typically in our movies, that's where we spend a lot of our effort and time to make sure that we're getting the performances right, because we have a strong belief that it's the audience's ability to identify with the characters that is what engages the audience with the movie and allows them to be successful. So if we had, for example, and I don't mean to pick on them or people who are into this, but if we had effects as big as animation, then we might say, well, geez, are we making an effects movie, and are people really, are they going to identify with that, those effects? And I think we can see some of that happening in, Hollywood movies where they feel like you walk out and you say, it was really fun to watch with all the effects, but, I didn't really care about the main character. So
Transformers 3.
I wasn't going to say it, but it's still fun.
It was fun.
So the other thing we do is...
but they have a different pie chart.
So we have these weekly meetings where we look at our... And I'm sorry you can't read this, but each of these lines here is a name of individuals working on the show. This is the role they do, and then there's a series of dates, which we track weekly, partly in order to kind of project when somebody's going to be able to roll off the movie. For budgetary purposes, to find out if we're running long, and also for future project planning, because we are now in a phase where we are heavily overlapped in our productions, and so it's important for us to know load balancing between shows within the studio. So it's really, really important.
So this document ties to what then our accounting department uses, our payroll department uses, and our cost report has in terms of managing that labor. So it's a beauty.
So in the breakdown, we identify, we were talking about earlier, who are the major characters in the movie. And we get down to maybe a handful. If it's 20 major characters, maybe we should go back to that script and look at it again. Rio does have a lot of characters, and there's multiple stories going on.
And arguably, you know, some people might say there were too many characters. But we look for what are the critical stories, what's the A story, what's the B story, who's carrying the A story, who's carrying the B story, who's a third level character, and when do they come in, and so forth. And this is, you know, I'm going to be talking about casting a little bit right now, because one of the things that we always try to do is we'd like to have an ensemble which works well together. And if I go back 12 years now and look at our casting on Ice Age, the original Ice Age movie, we had 3 main characters. We had Manny, Sid, and Diego. Each were different, and it was important for us to look at those individuals and try and find cast members which supported each other both comedically, emotionally, and whatnot. So we look at, you know, the cast members, and we also want to listen to their voices, because it's really important that the voices don't sound exactly the same. I remember there was a movie, I think it was from one of our competing companies a few years ago, a long time ago, and there were 2 great actors in these 2 roles, and when I saw the movie, I could not tell them apart. They sounded exactly the same. It was a traditional animated thing. It was Prince of Egypt, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, the 2 main, or maybe it was El Dorado.
Road to El Dorado, yeah.
Yeah, El Dorado.
Yeah.
There were 2 actors, Kenneth Branagh and somebody else. And
Kevin
vocally,
Kline.
I couldn't tell them apart. They were very, very similar. So what we look for is diversity in the voice, diversity in the way they perform with one another, and as we start to build the cast. So in this movie, clearly the 2 main characters were Blue and Jewel. And in this particular instance, you know, we were partnering with our friends at 20th Century Fox, and because this was a very major movie for them, they wanted a major star to be in the film. And over objections, I'd say, from Carlos, who really wanted a Brazilian person to play Jewel, it was decided that we would choose Anne Hathaway. And it's hard to say that Anne Hathaway, that there's a bigger star than Anne Hathaway. I mean, she really is huge, hugely popular, very good acting chops. And if I could, you know, speak for Carlos, he may speak about this later, he had no worries about her ability to act. I mean, he knew that she could play the part, but he did have concerns about lacking Brazilian flavor to her voice. But it was one of those things that we just kind of decided to deal with and pretended that maybe Brazilian birds don't sound like Brazilians. But no, seriously, I mean, she was wonderful to work with and a great collaborator. But from there, we started to circle out into some of the other cast members. And Blue, I hope that you've seen the movie. If you haven't, I think you get an opportunity this week. But Blue was the opposite of Jewel. I mean, Jewel was very vibrant, very energetic, very confident. And Blue was the opposite. He was nervous, scared, never been in the wild at all. And so we started to look at actors who maybe could play that role. And we ended up with Jesse Eisenberg, who at the time that we cast Jesse Eisenberg, really nobody knew who he was. Which is kind of cool in a way, because we had this great superstar, Anne Hathaway, and then Jesse Eisenberg, who at that time, I think he'd only been in a couple of movies that people might have actually seen. Zombieland had come out, and we all watched Zombieland, and we thought it was hilarious. We loved his performance. So we went with Jesse Eisenberg, and then to our great fortune, he made a little movie called Social Network, and suddenly everybody knew who he was. Okay. Then you add Linda and Tulio, who's like our B story, but also fairly major. And here was an opportunity to get Carlos's wishes, and we cast Rodrigo Santoro in the role of Tulio. And
sorry, just to interject, when we look at a pairing of an Anne and a Jesse, if we've landed on somebody like Anne, then you'll work in editorial and you'll pull movie clips from different actors and you'll try them against Anne's voice. To John's earlier point, really just to help convince us all that, okay, that's a solid choice, and it's somebody that our partners at 20th Century Fox feel is a marketable choice, because we're casting, to the point about Anne Hathaway as Jewel, I'm sure that Carlos, in his heart of hearts, wished that he were casting a movie that would just play in Brazil. but he's casting a movie that has to play around the world and has to have appeal around the world. So it's they're tough choices, but what a great job to have to make tough choices like that.
Yeah.
So picking Leslie Mann's voice is very distinct, and Rodrigo was somebody that Carlos wanted to work with from day one.
But I mean, I say these are collaborative decisions that are made, and we really do not regret any decision we made in the casting. I think the casting on Rio was one of those things where just an amazing group of people came together from our perspective. They all can really act the crap out of the characters, and their voices were great and interesting. And the other thing is, we knew it was a musical thing, so a lot of them had to sing. So we had heard, who knew that Anne Hathaway could sing the way she did until she was on the Oscars? That not this past time that she hosted, but the year before, she proved to a lot of people that she could sing, and she was actually cast in her movie already at that point. So it was one of those things where she had been on her movie for like years. Mm-hmm. She would go away and shoot complete other features in between our recording sessions. That's how long these things take to make.
The other satisfying aspect of landing actors and getting them into the production booth and recording them is up to this point, for about 18 months, maybe 20 months, we've been listening to ourselves do the voices. Our co-workers do the voices. So we've done a story cut with a guy from layout and someone from animation contributing a voice. And they're all great people, but they're not great actors. So getting real professionals in there is means so much to the reels once you start to see it come together.
They're getting better, though. I mean, the guy who plays the blue sky guy who plays Manny the mammoth, he's been doing it for 10 years now, yeah. So he's getting pretty good at it.
We can't let him go.
So the next one was George Lopez, who's a fantastic stand-up comedian, playing the role of Raphael. And this one, I think, the next one I'm going to put up there is, I think, one of the movie's great strengths is that we landed on Jermaine Clement, who is one of the duos from Flight of the Conchords, musically extremely gifted, comedically amazing. He'd never done a voice characterization in a film before, so it was a little bit of a leap of faith there. But it ended up being so great because the character that Carlos wanted was a cockatoo from down under. He's from New Zealand, but kind of close enough. But he just brought such a richness and wonderful texture to our villain. So we were so happy to get Jermaine.
We recorded him, put him in through the editorial process, and watched it. And you have that great moment of, wow, this could be a great, one of our great breakout characters. And what he did in the production record benefited the story artists. They took that and ran with it because of, it was just a great serendipitous casting for that. And then you send it to executives and hope they love it.
Which they did.
Which they did, yeah.
So then this next duo was really another coup in casting for us. will.i.am, international superstar in the music scene, had done an album with Sergio Mendes. I'm going to get into the music in a few minutes. Obviously he needs no introduction. Jamie Foxx, Academy Award-winning actor, comedian, came from roots in stand-up, also an amazing singer. And so we were able to get these guys to come in and provide the voices for Nico and Pedro, which are kind of a comedic duo in the movie. And so the next thing I have is a tiny little clip that's just showing a little bit behind the scenes of Jesse Eisenberg recording a line, and then an animator sort of acting it out on camera using his voice as the audio, and then the final animation. So it gives a little bit of a preview of some of the animation process. So we'll just go ahead and show that. Uh-oh. We have the audio up? I'll go back.
There you go. They had it turned down upstairs. There you go.
Okay, so I've had nothing to do with that.
Uh-oh. Still problems.
No, that's good.
Okay, I apologize for the audio. We were having a little technical problems earlier, but okay. So,
but the point, obviously the great part about that series of clips is just the evolutionary process that we go through.
Yeah, there's oh, now we. Am I on here now? Only the subwoofer is working. What was I going to say now? Oh, the video reference. So when we shoot the actors on the audio, we also videotape them. And the animators can use their natural expressions that they give while acting the role as reference for what to do in the movie. And they can also do what this guy did, which was kind of act it out himself to the same timings of the way we cut it as reference. And it's only reference, and it's just used to kind of like act things out and get a sense of what the character might be doing. We don't get the full acting experience with the actors behind the microphone because we make them stand still. Because the mic is right here and we want the perfect audio quality. And sometimes that can be really frustrating. We were doing some scenes with Anne Hathaway where we were like doing this like chase scene where the two birds are chained together and they're running through the favelas being chased by Nigel squawking at them. And she wanted to run all over the room. And it's like, oh, wait, you got to stand right here. And so she's like, running right in front of the microphone. But we had a whole lot of fun. She loved that part.
Yeah. Then you have to tell her you have to stand right here and you can't really move.
Yeah.
Because everything gets picked up on the
Or
microphone.
they'll make some big...
Yeah.
Like I just did. So it's kind of one of those training experiences with the actors. And then now after, like Dennis Leary will come in on Ice Age and he'll just like, he'll be right in front of the microphone and just give us the line exactly where we need it. Because he's done it so many times now. Okay, so I talked a little bit about the writing process, and like I said, it is not a perfect script that comes in and you produce it. In many ways, it's a little bit like the monkey at the typewriter because it takes 3 years to make these stupid things. It gives us a lot of time to go in and like constantly change things, and we do. We go in and we try and make them funnier, trying to make them more emotional, try to make them better, more entertaining, funnier. Did I say funnier?
Always funnier. It's also a very collaborative process throughout. So you have story artists who come up with lines or who come up with great ideas that then influences the writing. Or you screen the whole movie and you realize, wow, we sag here, or we're too confused over here. So you go back to the writing.
And I kid about the writers, and we have a collection of really great writers. And on this movie, there were quite a few. But we've used people who write for The Simpsons, which is one of the best consistently written animated things ever. I mean, almost every episode is hilarious. So we have this one guy, Mike Reese, who comes and works with us quite a lot, who's one of the senior writers on The Simpsons, to help punch up stuff. And I think he's actually punched up every movie we've done. But it is one of those things where it's coming from us, really. In this case, Rio was an idea that Carlos had in his head, this idea of the bird that was the last of its kind. And so it wasn't like somebody came in with that script and said, oh, would you like to make my movie? It was really, instead, we wanted to go out and find writers who were going to write the story for us and deliver it the way we wanted it. And that's an iterative process. And that's pretty much how movies are written in Hollywood for the most part, except for rare cases where somebody really does have a great script and they just write it and sell it. But it's usually the case where we are going out to writers, we're reading their material, we're reading what kinds of things they can do, and then we ask them, we give them writing assignments, and they deliver the assignments, and then we work them into the movie. So it's very much an iterative and interactive process.
And most writers who have animation experience realize and have to embrace the fact that they're not the last set of hands that will touch that script. It's just that's just a unique part, I think, of our business, because somebody might have worked on it 2 years ago, and then you hire somebody fresh with 6 months left before you release the film.
Right. Okay. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the production pipeline, which is massively complicated. And there's sort of two production pipelines. Actually, there's many more than that, but we've boiled it down to two, which is the character pipeline, which is the process of bringing a character from a sketch to a fully animated character, and I'm not going to go into all the details on those. I think that's going to be covered in some of the other talks, or they're talking about it pretty much from an art director's point of view. But I wanted to give you a sense of the complexity that's involved and the amount of time. This is just a quick little maquette that was done. But this is a project file, and I don't know if you ever have heard of that before. But this is a program written by Microsoft. Only available on PC, unfortunately. Thank God for parallels. Anyway, so this is just an outline of one character. Okay, this is Blue, and it probably doesn't include all of the steps. So I'm going to highlight just a little chunk so you get a better look at it. But these are all very complicated little phases and things that different people are assigned to do.
So it goes through, it's like a series of circles where it would start with a 2D design, go to sculpt, get built in Maya, might go back to sculpt because looking at it in 3D helps you just visualize more effectively than looking at it on a screen. Then it will get rigged for phase 1. Then it will go to animation testing. Then it might go back to modeling or design because animation realized they found something that when the character talks, the jaw collapses or it just doesn't look appealing. So they have to go back and work with the designer. It goes back to modeling and the circle starts again. You make a rigging adjustment and then you go back to animation testing. So we do that series of circles until my stomach hurts, and then we have to call it and say we're done. So
and for a main character, it can be a lot more. And yeah. Blue was also, there's something we call a variant, and it's kind of like a mutant. But basically, you design one character.
It's more like a clone than a mutant.
Well, it's a mutation.
True.
But you design one character. For instance, our humans, you may notice that a lot of them are strikingly look alike. But you start
Which is
with
common. It's very common in animated films.
It's common, yes. But you start with one, and you kind of flesh it out almost completely, and then you say, okay, well, I'm going to make a copy of that guy, and I'm going to just change a little bit. And then I'll use him for somebody in the background, and nobody will ever notice, except the studio executives.
Except directors.
What's with all the fat guys in there?
Except directors, they notice everything.
Pulling the fat guys out, you know, where it looks like the same guy all over again.
So we used Blue as a parrot body, for lack of a better word, as a macaw body, turned him into a parrot, resized him, turned him into a different type of parrot. We used Linda's body type and Tulio's body type as a medium female, tall male, and turned them into, I think literally, 10 types of bodies each, where we were able to procedurally change the hairdo, the skin tone, the wardrobe. And
I actually have the background animation test. I forgot to throw that in there. Maybe we'll throw that in.
Oh, yeah.
It'd be fun.
It's our credits.
But, I mean, the other thing that happens is that you use one character to, figure out everything. I mean, wings were really complicated with all those feathers and things. So it made sense rather than starting on 10 birds all at the same time and then fumble through all 10 at the same time as you're trying to figure out basic things like how this joint, whatever it would be called on the bird, works.
We called it an elbow.
Yeah, it would be called an elbow, but probably on a bird it's like something else.
But the wing took us a good year in pre-production because Carlos had certain anthropomorphic gestures he wanted to gain with some of the birds so that you were sucked into their scenes because they couldn't just be straight bird feathers and have straight bird anatomy. We had to twist it a little bit and caricature it a little bit and get expressive wings.
So this often results in an animation test, which, going to our earlier point about marketing, can be used for marketing. And sometimes what happens is the animation test is so good, but it's from an earlier rig, and then marketing wants it for real, and you say, well, you can't have it because that was an earlier rig and it doesn't work anymore. But so the next one I'm going to show has audio again, so if you could bring the audio up. But this is an animation test for Blue. So,
So one of the great things about this test, sorry to cut you off, is it was, and this is what I love about animation and the animation community, and animators in particular, is that you just never know what you're going to get. This was done by an animator named Mika Rapati, who is originally from Finland. Quietest guy you would ever meet. The quietest guy you would ever meet. He works his 9 hours, his 8 hours, 9 hours, and he works harder than anybody I know. He makes the most of that time. And he's been with us now since Robots or Ice Age?
Yeah,
Blue Sky.
Ice Age. He's been here a long time.
And he turned this test around, and you look at Mika did that, and because you just never know. But that test that got us so much mileage.
Yeah. So since we had a little pause there, I found that file. I want to show you this because this is really fun. We had a bunch of animators, a lot of junior animators whose job it was, I mean, fresh out of school, some of them. I think it was Ice Age, Dawn of the Dinosaurs. We had a girl come in and work as an animator who literally, like 3 weeks before she got her job, was like selling popcorn in a movie theater. That's how close she was to the business. But we often assign them animation tasks of background business. You know, characters that we knew we had tons of people in this movie, and they all had to be like doing stuff. And these junior animators put together a little music video, which I'm happy to share with you because it's really hilarious. So I'm going to go ahead and play this.
Turn it down some more. So if you're just starting out as an animator, this is really dry work. We need you to do a milling cycle, standing around, sitting on a beach. So this crew, you know, they really brought, some of these folks are animators now. They've already been promoted. So one of them did this on their own time, and they did all the flash work as well.
So they had a lot of fun with that, as you can see. But it's
But it was a unique challenge for us on this movie because we had many scenes with birds where we had dozens of birds. We had scenes with humans where we had not only dozens of humans, then we had hundreds of humans, and then we had tens of thousands of humans. So it was, I sound like the Count on Sesame Street, tens of thousands of humans. But we knew going in that our story was going to take us to Sambadrome. So how in the world were we going to figure out how to do a stadium filled with 35,000 people? And this was one of the building blocks we needed, was those cycles to then rubber stamp our way through and get it to look as good as it did.
So this is I actually opened the file. This is the project file for the film Rio, just to give you a sense of how massive it really is. There's over 10,000 tasks in this file, spanning the globe, 3 years. And all of these things are tracked and managed by Bruce and his team. And
just by me,
and
solely.
myself. But it's a massive effort. I mean, people underestimate. We always talk about all the beautiful pictures and the great animation and isn't the music wonderful and everything, but there's a whole machine behind the screen that has to keep the whole thing running. And you have 280 people at the peak that are all working, and come up with something for 280 people to do every single day is a task, and to make sure that they're doing them in the right order, because so-and-so can't start until so-and-so finishes, and this is a tool that we use, and it's pretty useful. But it's massively complicated.
It is, and we run fairly lean compared to other studios in terms of not only head count per department, but also management per department and overall in the studio. But even though I say we run pretty lean, on the graph earlier, that piece of the pie was, I think, 15% production management. And that's what's required on our films to do what John just described.
So, where were we? Okay. There was my note to myself, switch to project file. Here's just a couple quick little things. Again, I encourage you to come to Tom Cardone's talk. I think has a master class. He's talking about art direction, and he's going to be going over this stuff in lots of detail. But we draw a lot, and we make things in 3D as well. And this is just a little sample of the modeling for the favelas that were created for the movie. And these were designed in such a way that there was basically, I think, just one model or maybe 3 models that could kind of be rotated around and positioned, and they can create entire hillsides of favelas that look very convincing.
So when John says we draw a lot, it's usually it was Wacom tablets, now it's Cintiqs. And it's been interesting for me to come from a 2D realm at Disney and into Blue Sky. And even at Blue Sky, in my time at Blue Sky, in the last 7 years, I've seen basically everybody in the building now has shed traditional pencil and paper. Everybody in the building, story, design, anybody who needs to draw does it on a Cintiq. Because even the old schoolers who are our age, they've finally realized, wow, this is much more efficient. Just have to get used to a new tool set. Yeah. But it's been a quick digital evolution in my view.
Indeed. I mean, I remember on Ice Age 1 we had a guy come in to do color keys, and he was designing stuff, and he was using watercolors. He was an amazing artist. And I came in one day and he's like, it's like sprinkling Comet, that cleaner, sink cleaner on this painting to get a particular kind of effect. And he had never even touched a computer in his life, but now he's doing everything digitally. So it's amazing.
And he's not poisoning himself.
That's true. Not getting Comet all over his hands. This is a snapshot view of one of our internal tracking software. This is a piece of software that we wrote ourselves, and it had an evolution through, I think, 3 movies. And this allows us to track every single shot in the film and keep track of where it is in the production pipeline, who's assigned to it, what effects might be in there. And I can't interact with it because it's not hot. But you can click on images and see the current state of the sequence as a QuickTime movie. You can see snapshots of the lighting in progress if it's gotten that far, and so on. So this is a critical tool for us, And it also has the ability to generate reams and reams of reports, so we can kind of see how we're tracking. The next bit is the opening sequence of the movie, and it's a progression reel. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this either, because I think you'll get that coverage in another group, but I think there's going to be 4 quadrants. You'll see the storyboard version in the upper left, and then in the lower right you'll see how it looked in the final film, and then there's 2 interim versions, I think animation and layout in there. So I'm just going to let this sequence play for a little bit. I may not let the whole thing play.
And if you know, before you hit play, the life cycle of a sequence can take anywhere from 3 to 6 months from when it's approved out of story until it's done finally in lighting. This sequence took about 8 months.
There should be audio for this too. Oh, maybe I turned it down. On this one, the upper left, you know, it's color storyboards, which we don't normally do. But this one was very much needed for presentations and pitching the movie. And so we made a very kind of clean, nice version of it with a lot of color, because one of the things that is important about the movie Rio is that we wanted to portray the city in a very colorful way, the colors of Carnival, and you know, kind of get the vibe. So it was boarded in color. So the one in the upper right is what we call layout, and that's really the first time we put cameras in a 3D environment and shoot things in a 3-dimensional space. But the acting isn't there, it's just a placeholder before the animators get a chance to get their hands on it. But I find it kind of striking as I put this up to see how similar we were in the boarding as to where we ended up in the final film. It was very, very close. We may have cheated a little.
We work with a mixture of platforms. The top right is Maya. We model in Maya. We do our layout work with Maya. We animate in Maya down to the bottom left. But then really past that, it's proprietary. Everything we do to apply color and texture procedurally is proprietary. And our rendering software is also proprietary. I'm just trying to get my bearings here on what we're doing next. I guess, I think this is a video too. Yes. And I may not run through all of this, but this shows a little bit more of the technical side of it. This is for the hang gliding sequence, just to see what's kind of behind the pretty pictures. There was a lot of work that had to go into procedurally placing trees, buildings, cars, roads. If you look carefully in some of the wide shots in Rio, you'll see little car lights going by. I think there's a night shot looking down from the Chinese view, looking down into the bay there, and you'll see a little helicopter going through. As part of the yin and yang of that fine line between art and commerce, I'm usually the guy in the back of the room saying, "Nobody sees those cars. Nobody will ever see those cars." And in the scene where, when you see, yeah, evil voice. It is. When you watch the movie and you see the scene where all the power goes out, magically all the car headlights go out too. I don't know, it's like Close Encounters or something. All electrical activity stops. And I make a joke about that in terms of what I feel people will notice and where we have to make those compromises. But at the end of the day, I think what worked great for us is that Carlos and our creative leads, including John, really pushed hard to make it as authentic and as cool as it could be. And those are healthy debates that we have, that you have to have on every movie. And we usually had to resolve those debates by looking at it on a big screen and really coming to a group consensus that, okay, this is worth it, this isn't worth it, and you just make those decisions along the way.
Yeah, and I think on this movie in particular, we had a very healthy core team where we were realistic and respectful of each other, and it was really no battling, that you might hear, but there was healthy debate at times about what was important to make it in the movie, and it was all because we were like pushing for the vision and trying to make the will as good as we could. The next sequence I want to show this is the animation cut for the club sequences, which is the song was written by will.i.am, was performed by Jamie Foxx with will.i.am, and Anne Hathaway had a little piece at the end. And I'll talk. I'm going to wait a little bit to talk about music again, but there's complexities involved with celebrities at that level where they actually have to work at the same time can be very challenging. But I wanted to show this because it also points out some of the major battles we do have is in animation, where we constantly are in this like schizophrenic frame of mind of like, oh, we got to get the footage through, oh, that shot really looks bad, let's send that back.
Don't send it back.
It needs more time, or so certain shots are money shots, and they need more time to bake. I mean, it's hard. Animation is hard. You guys know. I mean, when I'm preaching to the choir here, but
so what we do usually is start with the law of averages. If we're expecting what traditionally would be called, 3 to 5 feet from an animator, now we want like 2 to 3 seconds, which is more in the digital realm, per animator per week. But some scenes, if they've got 50 characters, you're lucky to get 1 second in a week or in 2 weeks, because there's just so much going on.
Yeah, so this sequence shows the abilities of those background animators, because there's a lot of birds in the background dancing and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And also, it had an extra constraint, which is that they were animating to the rhythm of the music, which was every 10 frames there was a beat. And the editorial had to be cut in such a way that we were cutting, if we wanted to extend a shot for an animator for a moment to play, it had to be done in increments of 10, so as not to screw up the rhythm of the scene. And it gets probably even a little bit more complicated than that, because the music is written in 4/4 times, so really every 40 frames you come around to another measure again. So it wasn't as big of a problem here as it was in the Sambadrome at the end. But so the animators had to be animating in cycles of 10. The sequence is cut to cycles of 10, and we couldn't really open it up because the music was what it was, and it was all recorded ahead of time. So I'm just going to let this play, and you animator people can look at this and enjoy it. There should be audio on this. Now, the reason that some of those background birds look a little bit funny is that we had a system that allowed us to have enormous complexity in the final scene, but not in the animator scene. So, for instance, when we were looking at the huge Sambadrome images at the end of the movie where we filled the place with people, there wasn't all those pieces of CG geo in the scene at the time the animators were working. That was all added later. But I think there's something like, 100,000 people in that stadium? Something like that.
Something like that, I think, yeah.
But this was a smaller version of it, so there's a lot of birds in there.
But what you see in the Maya file is sometimes a series of cards, so it looks like a two-headed bird, but it's actually just one bird, to John's point. But when we put it through the render system and applied all of the scripts to make a crowd, that's when it cleans itself up and looks pretty.
It's probably good we're not hearing this full volume anyway. It doesn't sound very good.
Yeah. So this was a really, that was a tough sequence because it was dense with characters. It was a tough sequence for us to manage through in terms of just trying to get it out of the department. Because you had primary animation, you want to get a lot of emotion out of this scene. It's a great blue and jewel scene. It's a great performance by Nico and Pedro. And then you've got dozens of birds that you have to populate into the background when the primary animators are done. So a sequence like this takes you that law of averages and just blows it apart. And then you have to look for ways to make up for that with other types of sequences.
You get the idea. So the next scene I wanted to talk about too, and this is kind of the opposite sort of difficult scene, and that is sometimes fast action you can get away with murder. You know, you just have stuff happening, whipping through, but it's these close-up emotional shots that often are the ones that go over in the schedule. And so I'm going to just play a tiny little clip of Blue and Linda in the doorway when they're making a decision to go to Rio. Because of the subtlety in the eye movements and the little eye darts and the eyelids and all that stuff is the thing that sells the moment. It's the thing that makes you believe that the characters are saying what they're saying. And this is the thing I think Carlos will talk a lot about when he does his talk, that sells the moment. And we spent an inordinate amount of time on the eyes. And I think it's because we as humans, when we're conversing with one another, we're making eye contact constantly. And we're finding little, you know, if somebody's like nervous and they're looking around, you pick that up from their eyes, not from, you know, the flailing arms. So we spend an awful lot of time on the eyes, and we spend a lot of time on lighting the eyes to make them have life. And this scene is one that highlights that, I think. Unfortunately, I don't. I think we've been losing our audio here. Or maybe. Sorry about that.
I don't know if that's going to fix it.
No, it probably won't.
That
Okay.
shot, the shot that we were looking at was...
I might try just playing through the tiny speakers here.
There you go. It was over 700 frames. Those are the things I remember. By one animator, and it probably took him 8 weeks. But it's one of the most poignant scenes in the movie. So another scene that's going to break your law of averages, and then you have to make up for it somewhere else.
Okay, so the next thing we wanted to talk about was the music for this movie and how that came to be. Carlos was thinking, again, that the movie should be musical, because Rio is a very musical place, as you well know. So one of the people that he went to first was somebody who came from Rio, or came from Brazil, made Brazilian music very popular in the 60s, and that is Sergio Mendes. Now, Sergio is very well connected in the music business and has been for the last,
40 years.
40 years or so. And he has collaborated with some great Brazilian musicians, some of whom he pulled into the project, most notably perhaps Carlinhos Brown. So it was really a great joy to see how these guys worked together to create some of the music in the movie. That opening sequence that I showed you was a melody written by Sergio Mendes and then performed by Carlinhos originally in Portuguese, and then was transcribed into English with a very talented songwriter, Saida Garrett, who has written some amazing songs. Probably most notably in her career, she wrote the Man in the Mirror with Michael Jackson. So it was really an amazing collaboration. So Sergio was sort of the beginning point. He brought in Carlinhos. And then Sergio also had worked with will.i.am on an album a few years ago where Will had done some classic sort of Brazilian songs and updated them with contemporary music. And Will loves Brazilian music, and he's a big fan. He knows a lot of Brazilian music, and he knows the history of it. And he was a double whammy because he was great at performing music, but he was also a great actor, as we found out when we cast him in the role of Pedro. Another collaborator was Jamie Foxx, who, as I mentioned earlier, is Academy Award winning. I think that was for Ray, right?
It was for Ray.
Yeah, he did Ray Charles.
But he's a classically trained pianist. He's, really a great diverse background with him.
And so he sings this beautiful ballad that was written by Carlinhos Brown, originally written in Portuguese, again transcribed into English by Saida Garrett. And Jamie performs that in English. In the English version, I believe Carlinhos performs it in the Portuguese version, called Fly Love. And we also brought in Bebel Gilberto, and she plays a role in the movie, and she sings on the soundtrack album with us. Then the next artist is somebody who was so inspired by what we were doing. We produced our first trailer, which was that hang gliding scene. And we released it in the theaters, and I think we had Mosh Ganada playing behind it. And this woman, Esther Dean, saw the trailer in the movie theater and actually wrote a song on spec for us and brought it to us. Esther Dean has become quite a powerful musician and music producer in her own right. She's been working a lot with Rihanna. She wrote Rude Boy for Rihanna. She's just really out there in the popular music scene right now. But she was so inspired by what she saw in the movie theater with our trailer that she wrote a song for us, and we said, oh my gosh, that's great. So we used her song in the movie. It's the Let Me Take You to Rio song. And she also plays a really minor character. And it was really funny, a little anecdote. We brought her into the studio, and she says, I've done all these things with Rihanna and, all these people. But what I really want to be is a voice in a movie. And so she has one little line. She's like the little boy in the gondola at the end. He's like, look, Dad! And that for her was like so exciting. Similar story with Tayo Cruz. We were sitting around one day and we were talking about, the marketing team was like, oh, we really want a song that we could market this movie. And hey, have you guys heard that song Dynamite by Tayo Cruz? It's a huge hit, massively huge over in the UK. And so somebody said, well, why don't I just call him and see if we can have a meeting? So they picked up the phone, they called Tayo Cruz's agent, and they said, oh, he happens to be in LA. So Tayo Cruz came over to the studio. He watched an early rough cut of the movie. It turns out Tayo Cruz, who's this handsome-looking man there, his mother's Brazilian and lives in Rio. Who knew? He lives in the UK. I think his father's Nigerian, I think.
Yeah.
He loved the movie. He said, oh, yeah, I'd love to write something for you. I'd love to. He drove off the lot. 5 minutes later, I kid you not, 5 minutes later, he calls up and says, I think I have the perfect song. He came back, and he pulled out his iPod, and he had a demo that he recorded like a while ago and was trying to figure out what to do with. And we made like one tiny tweak to it, and we used it as the end title song in our movie. Telling the world, and it's all about love, and it's about finding the right person, and it was very thematic to the movie, and it was beautiful, and we added some Brazilian elements to it, and it ended up being just a great addition. And finally, I can't talk about the music without including John Powell. John Powell is our brilliant composer, and if you listen to the Rio soundtrack, the score version, and play through some of the tracks, you'll see that he's taking melodies from some of these beautiful Brazilian tunes that were written for our movie and transcribed them into orchestral arrangements and that enhance the fabric of the movie so incredibly well. And during the sequence in the end with the samba drum where the amazing samba is going, which was written originally for the movie by Carlinhos Brown, you can hear, I'm sorry, I take that back. I think Sergio wrote the melody. I believe that's correct. But Carlinhos wrote a lot of it. And again, it was a collaboration. These guys worked together. They had them in the room. We flew Carlinhos up from Rio to work with us, and we had 25 Brazilian percussionists in the Fox sound stages recording this stuff. But John Powell really was the unifying force to like pull all those things together and weaved it into the score. And the scene at the end with the samba drum, the samba music kind of goes out, but you know, in the dramatic moments, you still hear the pounding of the samba drums behind the narrative of what was going on in the scene, and it becomes the heartbeat of the scene. And it's just beautifully done. I'm blown away every time I hear it.
So for us, one of the biggest challenges as producers, for John and Carlos, it was a lot of relationship management with the talent. And this is one of the end products is this Fly Love song. Did they pull the cord on you?
I pulled it.
Yeah.
Wasn't really thinking, wasn't looking, wasn't searching for an answer.
Doesn't sound too bad.
In the moonlight, when I saw your face, saw you looking
So
at
one of
me,
our
saw
biggest
you
challenges, and I
looking
remember
out
being in
from
John's
my
office with a handful of Post-its and a wall calendar with like 6 months laid out. Who's on tour? Who's not on tour? Oh, they're back. Oh, but then Sergio's in Japan. Oh, okay. Well, can you fly Sergio over? Sergio doesn't want to fly over right now. Okay. How can we get all these people together? And that was a huge challenge, but so rewarding when you hear the final soundtrack. For me anyway, it was just such a unique experience to work with these powerhouse talents and try to bring them together. I also found it interesting that Carlos didn't know Sergio before this whole experience, but they had one conversation. Would you be interested? Absolutely. And now it's like they've been, brothers for 20 years.
Sergio is just that kind of guy. I mean, I formed a friendship with him as well. I mean, he just is so warm and collaborative. There's another artist that I want to talk about musically, Jermaine Clement, who is brilliant in his own way, and he wrote us a demo, which I'm going to play you an early version of the demo of the song that was written for the movie. This was also in collaboration with Mike Reese and Yoni Brenner, who are two of our comedy writers. But it's really great. This is his demo, only him.
Women once went weak when they kissed this beak. Now they just eek. Take a deep, you feathery freak. I was in telenovelas, making all the other fellas jealous with Maria's and Isabella's. But now look at my feathers, have to tape the things together. He's a nasty bird. I'm a nasty bird. He's ghastly. I'm so ghastly. I'll change all the facts. I'll cheat on my tax. I'll give all your cats a free Brazilian wax. He's a nasty bird. I'm a mean bird.
That didn't make the movie. Go figure. Okay. So we're going to try and wrap it up here so we have a little bit of time for questions afterwards. Hopefully we'll be able to do that. But I did want to touch on post-production a little bit because that's the other huge factor that goes into making one of these movies. This is an example of the shot where I was talking about where we filled the stadium with 150,000 extras, which is almost unheard of in CG work. And then we developed some technology that enabled us to do that. But it also points out that the other thing that we do when we're done is we go through color correction phases, and we have to go through almost every single, well, not almost, every single shot multiple times for multiple deliveries because we're delivering in mono, stereo, and we have to be prepared for video, television, airplane versions. Seems ridiculous, but when you're watching the movie in the airplane and it's on that little crappy TV, we try and make it look as good as we can. But we have to do all that stuff, and it takes quite a bit of time and effort to get it. It's much better now than it was when we first started doing Ice Age movies. The quality of the product that you actually see in the theater has been revolutionized in the last 10 years. I'm sure you've all noticed that. But
So the post process starts with about 8 months left towards release. So it overlaps with us finishing the movie. And we'll work in a spotting session with a sound designer like Randy Tom, an Academy Award winner for several films, and look at what unique needs we have for sound effects. And then as we head towards pre-dubs and final mix, all of that stuff starts to gel together. And obviously John Powell's involved with 12, 14 months left towards release. And we have several sessions with him, several back and forths, and then we'll hit the scoring stage for about, anywhere from 3 to 7 days.
right, and I'm going to play one other little clip for you. This is from a Walla session, and the Walla session is, when you're watching those movies and all the people in the background are having their little private conversations and you can kind of hear them, but you kind of can't. Well, that's where we record them, because in live action movies, they're not speaking back there. It's just too distracting for the acting. So they go back in and we do that later. This was recorded at Disney Studios where they had a special mic which is designed for 5.1 sound. So it was capturing motion around the microphone as well as, so that's why people are in kind of a group. And they're led by these people that are like good at doing this. They know when to get people going. So this is just a quick little clip. We got 20 Portuguese-speaking people in the Los Angeles area to come in and provide voices because we wanted the background voices to sound somewhat authentic, although Carlos was concerned a little bit about the dialects being different because they weren't all karaoke. But anyway, here you go. On that note, I'll switch.
So in the scene, that's where Blue and Jewel are being chased through the favelas, and that Walla group is providing the background noise for all of the residents watching a soccer game.
We just brought this up as an example of some kinds of things that are challenging in post-production when we're trying to get the images to look great for the audience. I mean, this is an uncolor-corrected image, and it's also a poor projection here, but on these little monkeys, their little ear tufts, from the marmosets, were very, very hot, very white, and they tended to blow out. And yet, we wanted to pull detail out of areas like this. So we can spend, an hour on a shot like this just trying to get those things to balance out, in addition to the work that was already done by the lighting team at Blue Sky. But so the color correction process, especially in 3D, is difficult because in 3D, when they're projecting it, just as a little side note, when you go and watch a regular, digitally projected movie, the brightness off the screen is supposed to be 14 foot Lamberts, and the foot Lamberts part you don't really need to remember, but it's supposed to be like 14. And when you go and see it in 3D theater, you're lucky if you get it at 3.5. So it's about 1/4 of the amount of brightness that's coming off the screen. And so what we do is we actually manipulate the images to look better under those kinds of projection facilities, and that's part of our process. So, and then the last thing we touched on briefly is a little bit of the marketing things. We sometimes have to do animation for people like McDonald's and Ferrero and stuff like that. But I'm not going to go into that in a lot because I'd rather have your commercial.
It's just more that it's just for us. It's another overlapping factor as a movie heads towards release that we have to accommodate. We want to accommodate because they're supporting the film.
So with that, we will open up to any questions that people might have. And thank you again for having us here today.
Thank you very much. Oh, John, we gotta.
Oh, we have to listen. And I apologize for all the audio shenanigans. Okay. Awesome. So I think I saw somebody in the back raising their hand. Oh.
You just grab that one? Yeah. That's okay.
Oi?
Oi.
Beleza. Boa noite. Quando vocês falam em divisão de trabalho, os animadores ficam responsáveis por cena ou por personagens? Como é que é feito isso?
The character development process has a supervisor of the blue character. So he'll be the lead, the supervising lead for developing blue. All the cycles that we talked about and the testing that happens will be supervised by one person. When a shot gets issued into animation, it's usually not done by character units. It gives everyone an opportunity to work on a variety of characters. Through that process, you start to see who excels at blue animation, who excels at Nigel animation or jewel scenes. We had a woman, Jackie Fortin, who ended up being the best animator for Marcel, the lead smuggler. And it wasn't until she worked on a variety of scenes that became clear.
Oi.
Oi.
Em que momento vocês têm que começar a se preocupar com o 3D estereoscópico e qual é a dificuldade que isso traz comparado à versão 2D normal?
We didn't touch on stereo much, but that's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, I'll hit that now. Basically, I mean, when we started off on Ice Age 3, I'm just going to go back in time a little bit. We didn't know that we were going to be making it in stereo when we started. And so we actually had to design the pipeline and build the team as we were in production. And so basically what happened was 3D was sort of following behind and setting cameras, three-dimensional cameras, based on the work that we had already done in mono in order to make things work in stereo. But, which worked out pretty well, because our sets are realized in 3 dimensions anyway. And, but as we went through Rio, we knew going in that it was going to be in stereo. And so we, at the earliest opportunity that we can start setting stereo cameras, we do. So it's in that layout phase, the upper right corner. We start looking at things in 3 dimensions with stereo cameras just to make sure that we're not doing anything like crazy. And it also allows us to see areas where we can maybe enhance, change the staging and the camera to enhance the 3D experience a little bit. Because sometimes we found that the editorial might need to be a little different. Sometimes when you're watching a movie in stereo, it takes you a second for the eyes to register that the shot in 3D, and you might want to open that shot up and have it be a little longer. So we just got to a point where we were starting to get a better sense of when those cases would be, and now it's integrated into our process. And in our current film, we are doing stereo really all the way through. We're looking at stuff now that is very, very preliminary.
In animation also, we have a unique opportunity to manipulate depth of field, you know, a la carte, which isn't as easy to do in live action.
Boa noite. A minha pergunta é em relação ao convencimento do Carlos Saldanha para toda uma empresa comprar o projeto e a ideia dele em relação ao Rio de Janeiro. Quer dizer, o que foi fundamental nessa negociação? Porque, bem ou mal, é um outro país, é uma outra cultura, é uma outra cidade, por mais famosa que seja. E ainda, obviamente, a questão ecológica, eu tenho certeza que deve ter tido sua importância aí. Mas, enfim, eu queria que vocês falassem um pouco a respeito disso, se fosse possível. Obrigada.
Shelled out a lot of cash. No. Carlos, if you've ever seen a presentation by Carlos, he's a very He's a very passionate guy. He's a very gracious guy. And I think it was a combination of things. And you should really go and hear his presentation. The Cliff Notes version is he had this idea in the works for 8 to 10 years about a bird who loses his way, and it went through a few different manifestations, and I think it happened at a point where Carlos was able to develop it on the heels of being a successful director for Blue Sky and partnering with our executives at Fox, where that success I think breeds credibility. That level of credibility and that level of passion opens ears and allowed him to get into the right rooms and talk about the project in such a way where he could plant those seeds now and start to develop something from the ground up.
But you did touch on something that I think is important to note, and that is that while Rio is an important city in the world, we Americans are not so well versed in places outside of America, North America, even. There are some who don't even know where Nebraska is in the United States. But so honestly, when we were starting to look at marketing the movie Rio, there were some sort of scary statistics that were coming back from the marketing team, because people would say, "Oh, what do you think of Rio? Oh, that's a great restaurant. It's just around the corner." And our first test audience, they thought Blue was named Rio.
Yeah.
And so we kind of had to, and I think it's, honestly, I think it's reflected a little bit in the box office success of the movie within our own country. It was maybe a little, could have been enhanced more if people had more education about where the city is and all that. But I think part of the interesting thing about it is that now people see the movie and say, "Oh man, I really want to go there," which is nice for Brazil. But also, it was interesting for the marketing team. They started after a while. They would present trailers in the U.S. that said Rio the movie, and so the people were starting to equate it with a movie as opposed to like a place to go or something to do. But it's a very interesting conundrum. But happily people saw the movie, and it doesn't really. I mean, Rio is definitely part of the movie, and it's woven into the factor. But if there's somebody in the middle of the U.S. who thinks that Rio is over in Siberia, they can still enjoy the movie. It could happen.
It could happen, as long as they paid their money to see it. I won't judge.
Where? Oh, there.
Oi. Eu queria saber se como é que é o processo de filmagem do ator, se o animador tem esse material integral para ele na hora de fazer as cenas, e porque eu reparei muito que tem muito do Rodrigo Santoro no Túlio. Eu queria saber se o animador tem todo esse acesso, se ele é filmado sempre e se ele fica com esse arquivão para ele na hora de animar.
The animators do have access to that footage. They can request it, and some animators do it more than others, but they do have access to those files, and it matches the take of the voice that they're doing. And so there is a little bit of Rodrigo Santoro in Tulio. The designs are disconnected. We didn't design Tulio to look like Rodrigo. I mean, we don't design our characters to look like the actual actors. Some movies have done that. We tend not to do that. But there are mannerisms that come out. And there's no question there's some Jesse Eisenberg in Blue. And there's definitely some Leslie Mann in Linda. I mean, if you watch some of the I'm blown away by looking at some of the animation that the guys have done on Linda, because she's so feminine. And, these are like 25-year-old guys animating a woman, and they really got a lot of the nuance down. And it's coming from study. I mean, they study live action, they study the footage that comes back, and it comes from doing reference footage. And sometimes they're even acting it themselves. It's pretty hilarious to see these guys acting to Leslie Mann's lines. But there's just some brilliant animation in there, but it's study.
But they also will watch the actor's body of work and try and discern style from that. So the animators who worked on Leslie Mann's scenes, they watched a lot of her movies, and she can, in the roles she plays, they get a sense of that pathos that she can bring, and that comes through in Linda's scenes a lot.
Now, one thing I'll mention on that question, because for international markets, and I presume you've probably seen Rio only in Portuguese. I mean, if you've happened to see it in English, maybe you have. It's a slightly different experience, but the dubbing stages are designed. They do all the international dubbing afterwards to match our takes and timings of things, but it's not done with the same kind of nuance that we choose. But the Fox team that does the international bits have been very, very good at doing it. And Rodrigo Santoro did his own Portuguese version, which was great. We encouraged our actors who could speak both languages to perform both versions because it was important to us to get the acting right. But it'd be interesting for me to know from you guys how the stuff really translated, because it's mystery for me because I don't speak Portuguese. But
boa noite. Eu gostaria de saber como acontece o processo de escolha dos filmes que a Blue Sky vai fazer, e se vocês têm projetos que vocês começam mais de um projeto e alguns não vão adiante, ou se vocês apostam todas as fichas em um projeto só.
Yes. We try to keep a handful of projects boiling in development. So some will have full scripts that may have 2 or 3 versions out there. Some will start to have storyboards, some character designs, a visual development process. In general, what we try to do, what every major animation studio does, is you try to come up with something that is going to stay unique in the marketplace from the day of inception until 5 years later, maybe when it hits theaters. So you have to come up with a story that you have to come up with characters that people are going to want to go see and take a journey with those characters to a place that might be unique or a familiar place that brings a unique experience to the audience. So it's really a chess game of you have different players in the mix in development, and you have to put your money down on which piece may make it to the other side of the board, and then it usually comes down to how far along a story is, how good a story is, how good are the characters that you want to take that journey with, and then what is a good marketplace decision for, and that I think is one of the hardest decisions that people outside of our world have to make, is what to invest in. We don't have, we have a unique challenge in that we're as passionate as other studios about our Blue Sky films, but we don't have a Disney trademark behind them. We don't have a Pixar trademark behind them. So we have to come up with, we have to develop projects that people are going to want to go see.
We do have the Scrat.
Yeah, we do have a Scrat, that's true.
I mean, but in actuality, we are overlapping more.
Yes.
In the early days, it was all we could do would be one movie at a time, pretty much one after the other. And I think when I started working on Ice Age 1, there were 60 people at Blue Sky. We grew to 160 people to produce it. We're now over 450 people. We've got 2 movies in production right now. We're doing Ice Age 4, which is in production, and then we're doing another film that's already in production, heavy into pre-production, starting production right after that one. And there are several projects which are candidates to be the next film from Blue Sky Studios. So we're developing a lot of those. They may, as you point out, they may survive, they may not.
Sometimes what happens, and you've read about it, where you'll have a project in development, and maybe it's about Vikings, and then, oh, they're going to do Thor, Marvel's going to make a Thor movie. All right, pull that one back, pull it to a back burner, and, you know, see if they actually make Thor. And then if it's nothing like what you want your Viking movie to be, maybe you proceed with it. We don't have a Viking movie, by the way. I'm just using that as an example. I mean, I love Vikings. I'd love to make a Viking movie. It's just not in the cards right now.
Except red hair.
Yeah.
We have 7 minutes for maybe the last question.
Okay.
Okay.
That gentleman back there is...
Yep. Oh, this guy snagged it.
Prazer, meu nome é Valu Vasconcelos, eu sou aqui do Rio e tenho um estúdio aqui também. Vocês são, como mostraram, muito bem desenvolvidos e pré-produzem muito bem o que estão fazendo. Mas algumas coisas fogem do controle. Aí eu queria saber, do ponto de vista da produção, qual foi o pior problema que vocês tiveram e como é que vocês conseguiram resolver isso?
Wow.
Well, there are so many on this one.
Can I lay down on this? What's the worst problem?
Well, listen, one of them clearly was that samba scene at the end, in the samba drum. I mean, first of all, you may have noticed this is our first movie since Ice Age 1 that we have humans in them. I know Ice Age 1 characters are a little bit like Frankenstein, you know, they were not really all that great. We tried to feature them as little as possible. So humans are huge.
That was probably it's hard to nail it down to one, but that, and if you're naming a handful, that's in there.
I mean, you guys know, I mean, we're all human experts. I mean, we look at humans every single day, and we know when a human is moving right, when they're moving wrong. So you get into, and we talk about the valley of death or whatever it is, you know, where if they become too real but not quite real enough, the appeal just goes away. So we had to find the right level of reality for our humans. So that's one thing. But then to complicate matters, we had birds with, you know, feathers on them. I think blue, just blue. You know, each feather consists of like a spike, which is like the center of the feather, and then off of that are all these little hairs.
Quills, yeah.
And I think there were something like 800,000 hairs on blue. And so we had to develop new rendering technology to do that. And make it look convincing and realistic and all that. And then the scope, the scale, 150,000 extras in those stands. You know, we had to develop new technology techniques to get those to render. And our movies are, for you techno people out there, our movies are all ray traced. So every single frame in this movie is completely ray traced, which is the most expensive rendering you can do. But also you get a lot of things for free in terms of reflections and, you know, all that kind of stuff comes along with it, but it comes with a cost. So the rendering capability, there were some shots in there that took many days literally to render.
We have
just a single frame.
We have a room about the size of this theater, just in terms of you know, dimensions. It would render farm, that we would have our render farm on, and the Sambadrome shot. You know, there were a lot of Hail Marys when we sent that to the farm. We sent it to the farm, and then we just waited. And you had to trust the machine power to pull us through.
Yeah, I mean, there were some of the machines are like 8 processors, and normally they have 8 gigabytes RAM per processor. Well, they were like down to 1 processor because we needed all 64 gigabytes of RAM just to get through the frame. So it was like pretty incredible.
Humans were huge for us.
Humans, birds.
We had to find a way. Carlos was insistent on not having them look too real, add some caricature to it so that you weren't trying to have that. So you weren't subconsciously thinking, oh, they're not, you know, it's just not right. And then we had a ton of new technical challenges. I think where we hit several home runs was capturing the beauty and scope of Rio and the geography that it offers. Thank you. That was a home run. But when we started out, there was a lot of us who weren't familiar with we didn't know what we were going to do. We just knew we wanted to try and pull it off. But that's what we like about what we do. Our movies all look different. They all have different challenges to them. The character count was huge. Humans were huge. Animating birds to this degree was massive, a massive undertaking. And trying to hit all the story tent poles that Carlos wanted to all of our satisfaction, and with the scope, that's probably the handful.
Bruce said it was a home run, but it was really a goal in the last minute.
You're right. You know your audience.
or
any baseball fans out there? All right, one more. That he's been raising his hand for a long time. If you don't mind.
Thanks. I don't speak Portuguese, so I'll try to ask my question in English.
What am I doing?
You don't need that.
Going, wait, this is in Portuguese.
I understood that you calculated the number of animators from using previous experiences, right? Was there a time when, or a moment when you said our numbers are wrong, we have to hire or fire people?
Nice one.
Nice question. Now, there are times when I thought we should make some changes. No, we've had great continuity with our crew, and there are always going to be employees that you feel you have to coach through certain obstacles. And some animators may do well on a movie like Ice Age, but then they move on to a movie like Horton Hears a Who, and they struggle because those characters needed a certain amount of squash and stretch that Ice Age didn't really call for. That said, on Rio, the biggest thing that affected our ability to produce animation at the same rates as we had in the past was the sheer scope of it. It was the number of characters per shot. You have that, the number of moving cameras, and the diversity of characters. Humans interacting with birds, throw a bulldog in there just for kicks, and you have people who need to learn how to animate quadrupeds and bipeds, and characters that are quadrupeds and bipeds. So I'm not dissatisfied in terms of what they were able to do at the end of the day, but it presented unique challenges, and overall, they really raised their game to meet those challenges. And going into it, we knew it would be a struggle to do what we did historically, because it was a much more dense, character-dense movie than we've ever attempted before. So, and we had to make, as we said earlier, that was some of the healthy debates, are there shots where we can remove characters? Do you have to have a moving camera there? Can you just go in on a 2-shot? Can you turn that 5-shot into a single? Things like that to really help, compensate for the time you want to take and do a dramatic scene with Linda and Blue.
I mean, the other thing, another way to answer that question too, is that, yeah, we do make mistakes, and sometimes in some departments we do what we call cross-utilization. If somebody can do one thing for one department, but another department is struggling, and if there are people that can do that, we'll ask them to work over here for a while. The other thing we've done is we've hired temp animators to come in and help finish. So we may get 15 people or something like that who are then come in for freelance. They maybe work 3-6 months and just help the film finish, and then when the film's done, they go on and work somewhere else. And sometimes they'll come back, and some people like that. I mean, some people really like to be able to go to California, work for a couple months. We've had people that have gone down to Weta in New Zealand to work down there for a little while. They go all around, but then they come back. So there is a certain number of people that we do that with, and we do try and reserve some funds in the budget to allow for those issues where we have underestimated cost in a particular place. So we always try and have some money in reserve.
And to answer another part of your question, we are tough where we need to be. So if it comes down to someone who's they're struggling and we can't coach them through it, then you have to do what you need to do. Entertainment is at the end of the day, entertainment is a tough business, and people who have been doing it for more than 5 years, if you haven't burned out on it and changed your mind, and you don't want to stomach what you can go through in terms of the peaks and valleys, then you can be a survivor like us.
Okay. Obrigado.
Yes. Thank you very much.